picture like that, how would it ever die?
And this monster starts running right at me.
Annihilated by nuclear bombs.
Beast is not dead. I put 4 bullets into him.
Oh, you're crazy.
But I saw that monster too. All I want is for someone to believe me.
Contaminated.
Face. Horrible. Look like it would scare you to death.
All right, let's get to work.
Beyond the shadows. Welcome. Late one night, a witness stands in his doorway staring at the figure on his porch. A man in a black suit whose clothes look pressed but wrong, whose skin is too smooth. His smile doesn't quite match the shape of his mouth. He asks about a UFO sighting the witness never reported publicly, repeating verbatim the details the witness only wrote in a private journal. His voice breaks at odd intervals as if he's mimicking human cadence from memory. The porch light flickers, the air feels thin, and when the witnesses glance away for a half a second, the man is gone, leaving no footprints, no sound, nothing but the echo of a warning that shouldn't have been possible for anyone to know. Tonight, on Beyond the Shadows podcast, we are discussing The Man in Black.
Wow, geez, I totally forgot to update the stream information. Cool, let's do that now. Let's do that now. Yes, can't believe I forgot that. I completely forgot it. Absolute insanity. Absolute insanity. Hello, folks. Welcome in to Beyond the Shadows podcast. This is season 2, episode 47, where we're talking about the Men in Black. The Men in Black. Not the Men in Black, the Men in Black. Yes, there is a difference. Give me 2 seconds. I actually need to, I gotta check Twitch right quick. I gotta make sure that this came up right. I'm usually so prepared. So prepared. Oh, I'm getting double audio. Hold on. Oh, gosh. There we go. Yes, Men in Black. We got it. We're live. We're going. How's it going, friends? Welcome in. Friends, neighbors, Romans, countrymen, spooks, cryptids, aliens, UFOs, and the like. Welcome in. Season 2, episode 47 of Beyond the Shadows podcast. I'm your host, Victus. I am your private, personal, professional paranormal investigator. And tonight we are discussing The Man in Black. Yes, like the actual Men in Black, not the Hollywood movie. Yeah, it seems like everything's running good. Everything's on track. Before we get going, I got one quick shout out to do. Let's see. Shout out to Lucy Hernandez. Thank you for your subscription on YouTube. You are the best. You the best. You the best. Everybody, round of applause for Lucy. Yes. Thank you, Lucy, for your sub. I really appreciate that. We don't get a lot of subscribers on the channel, so every single one of you make the difference to me. Thank you all so much. I'm trying my best not to look to my left anymore. I need to start paying attention to the camera in front of me instead. It is difficult sometimes. So if you catch me slipping, don't be afraid to say, hey, look at the camera instead of the side. So I look this way, I can actually see, my script and everything I've written. So welcome in, friends. Before we get started, we have our this week's news and paranormal. You all ready for this? Y'all ready for this? Let's keep this music out of here for just a second. Awesome. Here it comes. Are you ready? Because I'm ready. I hope you're ready, because I'm ready. Let's do this. This week's news and paranormal, we discuss the weird, strange, creepy, odd, and bizarre news happening in the paranormal world all around us. It might have passed over your radar, but it didn't pass over mine, so here we go. This week's news in the paranormal, first up is the triangular UFO dubbed the Dudley Dorito reappears over West Midlands in UK. Witness report a silent triangular craft with lights at the corners hovering over a region before drifting off rapidly. Can you really rapidly drift off? Isn't drifting kind of slow? The sighting matches a wave of identical encounters dating back to 2007. Astronomers say no aircraft were scheduled in the area at the time. The return of the Dorito suggests the phenomena is cyclic rather than isolated. In other news, new poll shows paranormal belief stronger than ever. A large-scale Canadian survey reveals that belief in ghosts, UFOs, psychic experience, and cryptids remain deeply embedded in the public. The majority of respondents claim at least one personal brush with the unexplained. Researchers say this reflects a growing cultural distrust of institutional explanations. The paranormal is becoming a mainstream worldview, not a fringe curiosity. Yes, finally. Canadians are getting it right. The Canadians are getting it right. And furthermore, rare atmospheric elves phenomena captured over Italy. Photographers caught a massive red ring flashing high above the clouds. An elves event caused by lighting interacting with the ionosphere. Though entirely natural, these enormous sky ripples look otherworldly and often coincide with UFO reports. Scientists say they're still not fully understood, and the timing near a recent European UFO sighting is stirring speculation. Moving on to paranormal investigations. Paranormal investigator into scrutiny and new cultural study. A new book examines how modern ghost hunters and UFO researchers sometimes warp scientific dialogue without meaning to. It highlights how belief, skepticism, and entertainment collide in today's paranormal boom. Critics argue that sloppy investigation techniques fuel misinformation, while supporters say these groups keep mysteries alive. The debate itself shows how deeply the paranormal has penetrated modern culture. And last but not least, strange glitch figures reported in multiple urban centers. Several witnesses in different U.S. cities claim to have seen motionless figures appearing on sidewalks or streets at night, vanishing moments later. Some describe them as human-shaped silhouettes standing near or standing still under street lamps. Security cameras failed to capture any of them, despite having a clear line of sight, and researchers are divided on whether these are hallucination misidentifications or a new wave of high-strangeness encounters. Yes, the new high-strangeness encounter. That's interesting. I can say for certain I've never heard of a glitch figure before. I have no idea what that means. A glitch figure. Oh, cool. I just noticed part of our script is missing. Hold on, let me grab it. Jeez, what happened? Usually I'm just so on it. I'm so smack dab on it. Glad I looked. I must have accidentally deleted part of it when I was copying and pasting into my Word document. All right, copy. Paste. Here we go. Wow. Jeez, I made the font way too big. Oh my gosh. I just added 20 more pages. I'm going to be scrolling tonight, folks. So welcome in, folks. Welcome in. Geez, we are up and ready to go. It seems like script is looking okay. Oh, that's going to drive me crazy. Hold. Bear with me now. We're going to actually undo that. I'm going to paste that correctly. Yeah, there's the problem. Bold, paste. Wow, what's going on there? I don't understand why it's doing that. So how's everybody going tonight? How are things in the multiverse? I trust that the two people that came and went after watching 30 seconds of the show are probably very bored already. I'm sorry it's taking so long. Okay, well, it doesn't want to do what I want it to do. I have to do it manually. Jesus Christ. Why did it paste in, like, size 34 font? Okay, 12? Go. There we go. I can live with that. Fantastic. We're right back on track. All right, so while I was researching this episode, I received a mysterious phone call. Very mysterious indeed. It was from a number I didn't recognize. All right. And they only asked me one question. Do you know what they asked me? They said, "What shirt are you wearing today?" Fantastic. Welcome to our second favorite segment of the show called What Shirt Are You Wearing Today? Where we very simply discuss what shirt are we wearing today. Anyone in chat is allowed to participate. Let us know. I'm glad to hear it. Check this one out. This one's my favorite. 10 points to anybody who knows this one. Because I think outside of my wife and I, am probably the only person left on the planet that's excited about this shirt. Huh? Anybody? Huh? Samurai Pizza Cats? Anybody? I think I'm the only person on the planet that still watches this show. Love Samurai Pizza Cats. We'll take you down the road just a little ways. Back in the world of my youth, where I wasn't allowed to take care of myself before or after school. So my dad would send me to my aunt's house, which was part of the way across town. And I would go and stay with her before school started. And he would drop me off before he had to go to work. And as a result, I would be dropped off at her house at like 4:30 in the morning, right? And we did not have cable at home, but my aunt had cable. So I would go to their house, they'd drop me off. I'd lay on the couch, turn the TV on, and start watching cartoons, and I'd be scrolling, clicking, and I found Samurai Pizza Cats by accident one day and became hooked. You know, we're talking, I was like 7, 8 years old. I still remember this show. You know, 30 years later, I'm still a fan. And my wife got me the shirt for my birthday this year. And I love this shirt. We were watching Samurai Pizza Cats today, actually. Great show. Actually, a really great show. But that's what shirt I'm wearing today. Enough hullabaloo. Are y'all ready to get into this? If you're ready, I'm ready, because I'm ready. Feel a sneeze coming. Yes, a sneeze. Thank goodness for muting microphones. Okay, jerks. Let's get in it. I say again, Season 2, Episode 47 of Beyond the Shadows podcast. I'm your host, Victus, and this is the Men in Black. Even before anyone called them the Men in Black, the presence was already there, lingering behind the earliest waves of the American UFO panic, peered at the edges of testimonies, slipped quietly through small towns, and left behind unfinished conversations, missing documents, and witnesses too shaken to speak openly. The earliest contactees noticed the pattern long before the public understood what it meant. They described men who arrived unannounced, always after an encounter, always knowing more than anyone should. Their questions were direct, their warnings sharper, and their presence created an atmosphere that fueled out of proportion to the significance of the people they visited. A farmer in a rural corner of the county who saw a light over his field suddenly found himself answering questions from strangers who acted like their visit was a routine. A trucker who witnessed a glowing disc hovering over a rest stop felt uneasy when two men appeared at his workplace the next morning asking about the experience with a detached curiosity that felt more like an interrogation than an inquiry. These encounters took place before there was a defined structure for UFO investigation, before Project Blue Book turned the topic into something bureaucratic. That early window allowed the phenomenon to evolve into a space between folklore and official denial. Researchers later described it as a shadow organization built from fear and ambiguity of the sightings themselves. People wanted to believe the visitors were simply government agents responding to reports, but the behavior of these men rarely fit any standard model of law enforcement, intelligence gathering, or military protocol. They arrived alone or in pairs, never introduced themselves, never offering identification. They asked witnesses to repeat their stories and advised them to avoid discussing the matter further. It always framed a suggestion that carried the weight of a threat. The pattern became evident during the 1950s when UFO sightings surged and the news began mentioning strange visitors who followed their reports. These weren't investigative journalists or curious locals. They were men described as tall, thin, expressionless, and unusually calm. Some spoke mechanically as if repeating lines memorized for the occasion. Others asked odd, unrelated questions that left witnesses confused about the purpose of the visit. The tone was sometimes polite, but the intent was unmistakably intrusive. Witnesses would later recall that the men seemed to know personal details, schedules, and conversations they shouldn't have access to. A turning point came with Albert K. Bender, a man who unintentionally shaped the entire mythology. Bender founded the International Flying Saucer Bureau, one of the earliest and most ambitious UFO research organizations in the world. His journal, Space Review, circulated among early enthusiasts hungry for something beyond official statements. Bender was methodical, deeply curious, and wholly committed to uncovering what the government refused to acknowledge. His interest didn't go unnoticed. In 1953, as he prepared to publish a report he believed would, quote, solve the UFO mystery, he received an unexpected visit from three men dressed in black suits. They entered his home with the authority of officials, yet never claimed an agency affiliation. According to Bender, they communicated using both spoken words and... According to Bender, they communicated using both spoken words and what he described as a form of mental pressure that left him nauseated and disoriented. The visit changed him radically. He shut down his organization, stopped publishing, and withdrew from public life. When he finally spoke about the encounter years later, his descriptions were so unusual that researchers didn't know how to categorize them. He mentioned glowing eyes, a choking sulfur-like odor, and a sensation that visitors weren't entirely human. The men in black in this account behaved like enforcers, yet their methods and presence carried elements that didn't align neatly with any government protocol. Bender's experience became a cornerstone of the phenomena, the moment where the idea of the men in black shifted from shadowy operatives to something more uncanny. Researchers like Gray Barker and later John Kuhl recognized the significance of Bender's testimony and began collecting similar stories across the country. Now, if you remember, John Keel was the investigative journalist from last week's episode when we discussed the Mothman. So, there is a parallel here why we decided to go with Mothman story this week because, not Mothman story this week, Men in Black story this week, because Mothman ties in with Men in Black. It just seemed like a good segue between two episodes to continue, a continuation on last week's investigation. See what I'm saying? Baker's early work framed the Men in Black as a specialized branch of the intelligence community tasked with suppressing UFO disclosures. At the time, that explanation was comforting to many. The Cold War had produced countless secret programs, and the idea of a covert team dedicated to controlling sensitive information felt plausible. Hold on, let me slide my script over just a little bit. Trying to put my script underneath the camera so it kind of looks like I'm facing the camera here. I'm working, all right? But Barker himself began noticing details that didn't fit. Witnesses reportedly described the men as pale, strange, and motionless. Their mannerisms were stiff, as if mimicking normal human interactions. They drove cars that appeared spotless and new, even though the models were outdated by decades. The clothing was immaculate, but often out of season. Their speech patterns were flat, sometimes monotone, and occasionally riddled with odd pauses that made conversations feel artificial. Some of the most compelling details came from witnesses who had no interest in UFOs, no involvement in research groups, and no reason to fabricate stories. These were ordinary people, teachers, farmers, laborers, who reported something strange in the sky and suddenly found themselves speaking to men they didn't recognize, men who knew things that they shouldn't. A school teacher in Ohio claimed 2 men showed up at her house within hours of the sighting that she had witnessed with her students. They asked her to describe the event, then insisted she avoided discussing it publicly. They never identified themselves, left no contact information. When she attempted to follow up with local authorities, no agency admitted sending anyone. Another case involved a small-town sheriff who responded to a group of residents reporting bright lights over a rural highway. Later that week, 2 men visited his office dressed in identical suits and speaking in an unusually formal language. They asked precise questions that suggested that they had access to information that hadn't been made public. The sheriff described feeling unnerved by their presence, noting their lack of inflection or the way that they watched him without blinking. When he tried to ask about their affiliation, they simply ended the conversation and walked out. He followed them into the parking lot and watched their car pull away without making a sound. Patterns like these suggest coordination, but not necessarily in the way one might expect from a human organization. Intelligence officers leave paperwork, chain of command traces, procedural footprints. These men left nothing. The papers weren't tracked, reported, or acknowledged by any branch of the government. If they were part of a program, it was one so secret that not even adjacent agencies were aware of it. Yet the inconsistencies in their behavior made many researchers question the government's connection entirely. And through the 1960s, UFO reports grew more structured. Project Blue Book attempted to systematize the investigation process when it came to UFOs, right? But even within the Air Force, the Men in Black were regarded as fringe rumors that rather than operatives tied to the program. Officers involved with Project Blue Book later stated that they had no knowledge of any agents dressed in black visiting civilians. The great J. Allen Hynek, who consulted for the program, Project Blue Book that is, admitted later in his life that if such operatives existed, they weren't working under Blue Book's authority. Some researchers interpreted that as evidence of a deeper, more covert project. Others saw it as a validation of what Bender had suggested years earlier, the possibility that the Men in Black weren't government agents at all. Witnesses often describe their visits as abrupt and disorienting. People opened their doors to find strangers who seemed almost too eager to enter, speaking in an overly polite tone that felt rehearsed. They asked for precise wording of what people had seen, requested clarity on small details, yet rarely writing anything down. Some seemed fascinated by trivial objects, touching them with a kind of puzzled curiosity, and others acted as though they were learning human mannerisms from observation rather than experience. A factory worker recalled one man commenting on his ballpoint pen as if he had never seen one before. asking detailed questions about how it worked before returning to the official purpose of the visit. These odd behaviors made some witnesses question whether they were human at all. The skin sometimes appeared too smooth, like plastic or wax. Their movement felt rigid, often deliberate. Some people reported an uncanny sameness among them, as if each belonged to the same mold rather than a natural variation, right? Their arrival and departure were equally unsettling. They left without ceremony, walking away without looking back, driving off in vehicles described as pristine but mechanically strange. Engines made little or no noise at all, and doors closed too soft. Tires left no tracks. During this era, UFO researchers began receiving their own visits. Men involved in collecting reports or publishing newsletters found themselves confronted by strangers who claimed to be interested in their work. Some asked to review private files, insisting that they need to verify information for, quote, national security purposes. Others encouraged them to discontinue their investigations. A few described subtle threats, remarks made with polite tones but chilling implications. One researcher claimed a visitor warned him that, quote, it would be unfortunate if curiosity led to complications, end quote. Another man said that a men in black advised him to, quote, prioritize health over obsession, a comment he later interpreted as a threat. And despite the fear these encounters generated, the men in black didn't always present themselves as threatening. Some were described as soft-spoken, polite, and almost gentle in their approach. Witnesses found themselves confused by the tone, which contrasted sharply with the content of the warnings. It created a sense of dissonance, as if the men were attempting to avoid intimidation while still insisting on secrecy. The contradiction made their visits feel even more surreal. A witness in New Mexico recalled being asked to stop discussing a sighting for his own, quote, for your own peace of mind, end quote, a phrase that felt soothing yet controlling. And the deeper researchers looked, the more they realized the phenomenon didn't follow the logic of conventional intelligent operations. There were no clear objectives, no consistent procedures, and no paper trails. The movie portrayals decades later would simplify the idea into clean lines and clear hierarchies, but the real reports painted a different picture, one of chaos, mimicry, and enigmatic presence. The men acted as if they belonged to an organization, but no such organization ever emerged from FOIA requests, whistleblower accounts, or declassified archives. Instead, the men in black remained firmly planted at the edge of the UFO community, appearing when sightings surged and vanished just as quickly. At the same time, government agencies conducted their own surveillance of UFO groups. The CIA monitored organizations suspected of attracting Soviet interest. The Air Force documented sightings, often downplaying them to avoid public panic. But none of these official reports matched the behavior described in MIB encounters. Government agents introduced themselves, recorded information, filed reports, maintained professional decorum. The men in black suits acted outside those norms. They used outdated cars in perfect condition. They arrived at odd hours. They displayed mannerisms that felt memorized, and their warnings were delivered with subtle and uncanny emphasis. The ambiguity made people wonder whether the government was involved at all, or whether these men were merely taking advantage of the secrecy surrounding UFOs to pursue an agenda of their own. Some theories suggest private agencies or rogue groups. Others claim the men in black were part of an experimental psychological program, testing witness reactions. But none of those theories explain the more extreme encounters, the ones where witnesses described impossible details, the lack of body hair, the identical facial features, the unnatural posture, the metallic sheen in their eyes. Researchers began documenting patterns not just in visits themselves, but in the aftermath. Witnesses reported feeling dizzy or confused after speaking with the men. Some experienced headaches or memory lapses. A few said the men seemed to exert a kind of mental influence, steering the conversation in specific directions. These reports echoed Bender's initial claim that the visitors communicated partially through thought rather than words. Although the notion seemed far-fetched at the time, the number of witnesses describing a similar sensation made it difficult to ignore. The Cold War created a backdrop of mistrust and secrecy, making the existence of surveillance agents plausible. And at the same time, the supernatural elements of the Men in Black phenomenon emerged strongly enough that researchers couldn't dismiss them. The blend of human and inhuman qualities gave the MIB an eerie duality, one that blurred the line between conspiracy and paranormal. People began wondering whether the men were wearing disguises for something else. Entities using human form to interact with witnesses, perhaps to influence the narrative around UFOs or monitor human responses. And by the 1960s, the Men in Black had transitioned from an obscure rumor to defining element of UFO culture. Their presence loomed over sightings, investigations, and witness reports. They appeared whenever the truth seemed within reach, acting as gatekeepers or suppressors, though their motives remained unclear. Some believed they were protecting national security, and others thought they were covering up alien contact. And a growing minority suspected they were neither human nor government. But something stranger. It's really funny. I'm just gonna say, tiny sidebar. Oh, here we go. We're at the end. Let me just read this last little bit. As we move forward in this episode, the ambiguity only deepens. The next decade brings more encounters, more questions, and a growing realization that Men in Black operate in a space where government secrecy and paranormal mimicry overlap in ways no one anticipated. I just want to go back 3 sentences back. The script here says, some believe that they were protecting national securities. Others thought they were covering up alien contact. A growing minority suspected that they were neither human nor government. So that sentence implies that we believe that the government is non-human. Does it not? Just saying. I don't know. I'm maybe even grasping at straws. Anywho, that was Act 1, everybody. Totally forgot the Act 1 animation. I am off my game tonight. Jeez. Thank you, the 5 people that popped into YouTube and disappeared after 35 seconds. You guys rock. Here you go. Sorry I'm not more entertaining. It's fine. I do this for me. And if you want to come along for the ride, come along for the ride. Alright, so Act 1 has always been kind of like, I don't want to say the palate cleanser, but the palate setter. Like, it sets the taste of what we're looking at here. Definitely setting the pace. Yes, we're definitely setting the pace for what we expect. And in Acts 2 through 5, there's a lot of history. There's a lot of, like, deep-rooted information behind the Men in Black. And I don't think a lot of people realize how deep this rabbit hole goes. When we start talking about Men in Black, everybody thinks about the Will Smith movies, right? This is not what we're talking about tonight. We are not talking about the movies. I mean, don't get me wrong, I love Will Smith as an actor. He's a great actor. However, this is not what we're talking about tonight. We are talking about the people that show up in investigations after things happen. Okay? And again, I want to draw the parallel between last week's episode and this week's episode. I just knocked my light down. And that scared the living shit out of me. Wow. Absolutely scared the living shit out of me. Alright, let me move my chair forward. I can't believe how badly that scared me. I need to stop leaning back so hard. Wait, what's my range here? Okay, yeah, I was a little further back than I usually am. Ugh. Made my little heart jump. Anywho, back on track. Jeez, where was I? Yeah, so I want to make sure that we are clear that we're drawing this parallel between last week's episode and this week's episode. It was very, very evident during the Mothman investigation that there was this kind of shady government, non-government agency that was going around and talking to people, right? But from what we can gather from Act 1 here, is that we're not necessarily looking at a government agency. We're looking at something else. We may not even be looking at a government agency at all. This could be something outside of the government. This could be, you know, I don't like the idea that it could be like a fringe group. This makes me kind of sad because the lore that's surrounded the Men in Black for all these years always kind of seemed to be government, right? Like there's something there related to the government. However, it does feel like it's starting to seem like this is not government. This is... I hate to use the words non-governmental, but it really doesn't feel like government. What was that? Let me move this window around a little bit. Sorry, I'm trying to resize here. I'm trying to keep my script in the right spot. So that way I can see everything. I got like 6 tabs open right now. So yeah, this was just the setting the pace for what we're dealing with tonight. Act 1 is. All right, and in Act 2, this one is subtitled "The Government That Doesn't Blink." I hope you're all very ready for this. I need to adjust my thermostat here. I'm getting kind of warm. 40 degrees outside and I'm warm. Let's see. Looking at YouTube for just a second. Cool. All right. Everything's running good. Yeah. No drop frames. We're running great. All right. Well, let's move on to Act 2, everyone. I think that's the case. I haven't had enough beverages. Let me just finish this one before we get on to Act 2. I will say that this episode will be under the playlist in YouTube, cryptids, right? Because there is a growing consensus that since this isn't government, we might be believing that this is a non-human entity. And by proxy, some people do believe that the Men in Black are actually a form of a cryptid. Something to think about. All right. So I doubt. So I was out of town last week. No, I was out of town this week. I just got home yesterday. And part of the reason I was out of town was I was doing training for my job, and I was sent to Suzuki school. And I passed my course, and they were handing out koozies. And I told my instructor, I said, give me a koozie. I will use it during my podcast. So if either one of my instructors decide to pop into the podcast, how's it going? Hey, friends. Glad you're here. Shout out to Suzuki School. Told you I'd give you all a shout out. This episode is not sponsored by Suzuki Marine. However, if they do want to sponsor this podcast, I would be open to it. You ready to get onto it? Let's get on to Act 2. Y'all ready? Because I'm ready. Oh my lord. Oh my lord. Let's go. Act 2, everybody. The government that doesn't blink. The middle years of the 20th century created a perfect storm of surveillance anxiety. The Cold War grew teeth, and the idea of an unseen intelligence arm monitoring civilians didn't feel far-fetched. Americans already knew someone might be listening. Phone lines were tapped, letters were intercepted, and neighbors suspected each other of ideological impurity. It was the kind of cultural soil where unexplained visitors could appear at a doorstep and automatically be assumed to represent federal authority. That assumption gave the men in black room to operate. They didn't need identification when the public already feared the reach of the government. During this period, people involved in UFO sightings often hesitated to report what they experienced. They feared ridicule, employment consequences, and attention from agencies they didn't understand. Some witnesses said the men in black played on that fear perfectly. They framed their questions with just enough official language to inspire obedience without offering any proof of their identity. When asked who they represented, they responded with ambiguous phrases like security services or the department, never clarifying whether they meant a military branch, a federal bureau, or something more shadowed. So this is an interesting, I'm going to sidebar here for just a second. This is an interesting point. Okay, so during the Cold War, we were afraid of Russia. It's as simple as that. We were afraid of Russia. We didn't want, we were, like, it was in the news, like, report suspicious activity, like the way we are today about terrorist activity, the way they were during the Cold War about reporting suspicious activity. They were like, if you suspect somebody of being a spy, report them immediately. And they loved it when people did. So there was, to give you an example, there was this movie, one of my very favorite movies of Jim Carrey. I know that when you think about Jim Carrey, you immediately think about something like Ace Ventura or Dumb and Dumber. On the contrary, this was a very serious movie called The Majestic. Loved the movie. Still love this movie. I watch it all the time. I probably watched it 200 times. And the story goes, he was a writer in Hollywood, and he was put under investigation by the government and blacklisted in Hollywood because he dated a girl who was into communist ideals. So they blacklisted him. They wouldn't let him work in Hollywood anymore. So, like, the day he got the letter saying he was being put under investigation by the government for an investigation concerning conspiracy, he lost his job that same day. So he goes out on a bender. He's drunk, drives home, and crashes his car, hits his head, and when he wakes up, he doesn't remember who he is. Great movie. I'm just saying. Bear with me 2 seconds and let me finish this tangent. He wakes up on a beach further down the coast, no memory of who he is, and everybody in town thinks that he is one of the guys, one of the people in town that owns the movie theater's son, who went to the war and never returned. He said he was missing in action. And they're all like, oh, it's him. Everybody, it's him. He's back. And so they treat him like he's this guy's son. Over time, he builds a relationship with the people in the town, fills the shoes of this young man who went missing in action, and eventually he gets his memory back. End of the movie, he goes back to Hollywood, and he gets put in front of a congressional hearing. And this is what I'm getting at. Is there was a time where a normal person could just be like, boom, get a letter in the mail, you're under investigation. And it was so far outside the social norms for the time that as soon as you were like put out there in public as being under investigation by the government for conspiracy, everybody like shut you off. Nobody wanted anything to do with you. And the term back then was being called blacklisted, where you were put on a list of people that were put under investigation, and as a result, nobody wanted anything to do with you. Nobody. You'd go to the drugstore and you wouldn't be able to deal with the guy who's made your prescription medicine for the last 20 years because they don't even want to be seen talking to you. So there was this idea that anybody that you talk to could be a government agent. They could be listening. And they were quick to draw lines to innocent people and label them communists. And it ruined many, many, many people's lives. In hindsight, it probably wasn't as bad as they made it out to be. There probably were not Russian communists running around the United States trying to convert people to communism for whatever reason. But like in that movie, Jim Carrey's character was put under investigation because he was following a girl that he was dating, and she's like, hey, come to this meeting with me. He's like, I don't care. I'll just go wherever you go because I'm in love with you. And it was a meeting, and in the meeting, somebody overheard them talking about communist ideals. And that put him on the blacklist because he was following a girl who wanted to go to a meeting that just so happened to be talking about communist shit. So the idea that was there, the fear was there. Say the wrong thing to the wrong person, and you could become blacklisted. So this was fertile ground, very fertile soil for what was happening here. We were in the middle of a pandemic, for the lack of a better word, that had the American people in a state of perpetual fear, afraid to say the wrong thing to the wrong person. Hell, say the wrong thing in the wrong room, just the wrong room, and you could be blacklisted, and it would destroy your life. So this was a thing. So when people in dark suits show up at your door and politely to tell you not to talk about something, is it so far-fetched that people were thinking, oh shit, that was a veiled threat, right? I need to do what they're saying because they're clearly not identifying themselves. They're clearly part of this government agency that's being sent out to spy on people. So this is what I'm getting at. There was the time. It was the perfect time, the perfect setting for something like this to happen. And I do believe that this is why so many people so closely tie the Men in Black to the idea of a government agency. Because at the time, there were government agencies running around doing investigations on people and doing covert stuff and secretly listening in, tapping phone calls, reading letters. It happened. Food for thought. Sorry about the sidebar. I'm sorry. All right, let's move on. So government files from this era confirm that military intelligence kept close tabs on UFO reports, but these monitored activities didn't resemble the visits described by witnesses. Official investigators logged their names, wore standard uniforms or business attire appropriate to their stations, and completed written reports. They didn't appear uninvited late at night. They didn't demand silence, and they didn't remove evidence or confiscate photographs without documentation. They didn't demonstrate the uncanny behaviors that repeatedly surfaced in MIB encounters. Despite these distinctions, some Men in Black episodes aligned closely with genuine government actions. There were instances where real intelligence officers visited witnesses. These individuals usually belonged to projects investigating whether UFO sightings represented foreign adversaries. In these legitimate cases, the agents behaved predictably, They asked structured questions, emphasized national security, concluded their interview with formal warnings or written instructions. Their manner was consistent with government training. All right, so let's see, we're seeing a little sidebar and a tangent there, but still, we're seeing, I think what we're trying to take away here is that people believed that this was a government agency. However, in the situations where people are actually being interviewed by government agents, their behavior is normal and human-like, as opposed to interactions with the MIBs here seem non-human in every way possible, pretty much, right? But the men in black from witness testimonies behaved differently. Their questions were specific yet bizarrely phrased. Their interest in mundane household items hinted at an unfamiliarity with everyday life. They stood too still or reacted too slowly to basic conversational cues. Witnesses described feeling the men were studying them more than the sighting themselves. The contrast between authentic government agents and MIB visitors revealed two parallel patterns. The official one recorded in archival documents, and the unofficial one surfacing in stories that circulated through UFO communities and small-town gossip networks. Researchers attempting to map these encounters realized the men in black often appeared in clusters following significant sightings, not in consistent geographical patterns, but in waves that matched spikes in public attention. When newspapers published UFO reports, witnesses received visits. When television segments aired, investigators experienced pressure. When cases gained momentum, someone arrived to quiet them. Yet the men never introduced themselves as journalists or media representatives. They behaved as if their job hinged on silencing a narrative they couldn't control. One well-documented example came from Betty and Barney Hill case. All right, so this was early season 1. This was our only two-parter episode that we've ever done, the Betty and Barney Hill abductions. We talked about this one extensively. And for those of you that don't know, Betty and Barney Hill was the OGs, the original UFO abduction, the first recorded instance of a UFO abduction, and very heavily documented. We actually, in season 1, we actually listened to the regression hypnosis therapy sessions of Betty and Barney Hill. And at the time, one of our hosts was a licensed regression hypnosis therapist. And his reaction to these recordings was very, very interesting. And I challenge you all to go back to season 1 and listen to that. Very great episode. Very good episode. Jeez, yeah. The Hills experienced their famous abduction encounter in 1961, and the public record already included extensive interviews, hypnosis sessions, and official statements. But after their stories gained media exposure, unidentified men began appearing near the Hill residence. They sat in parked cars outside their homes for long periods without approaching. They lingered at the edges of workplace parking lots. The Hills noticed that the same two individuals several times, yet never saw them enter or exit buildings. The behavior resembled surveillance more than investigation. When the Hills tried to document these visits, the individuals disappeared before they could gather proof. Government agencies disavowed any involvement, stating explicitly that no operatives were assigned to monitor the Hills. The unresolved nature of the surveillance left them questioning whether they were targeted by an anonymous individuals or something far more unusual. Their experience set a pattern. Witnesses became aware of being watched even when no official investigation existed. Another prominent case from this period involved a civilian named Rex Heflin. He photographed a structured craft hovering near a highway in 1965. His images became iconic because they showed a clean, disc-shaped object captured from multiple angles. Shortly after the photos circulated, Heflin received a phone call from a man claiming to represent NORAD, who requested the negatives for analysis. The caller's tone conveyed authority, and Heflin complied. Days later, curious about the status of his photos, he contacted NORAD. They denied having any record of the call, the case, or the existence of an officer matching the caller's name. Heflin never saw the original negatives again. This incident exemplified what researchers came to recognize as the MIB signature. A stranger introduced a government agent sounding cover, invoked an urgency, and took physical evidence. When witnesses attempted verification, no agency claimed responsibility. It created a vacuum where the men operated freely, assuming the legitimacy afforded to official organizations while never belonging to them. The ambiguity worked in their favor, ensuring confusion and eroding trust. These interactions began drawing attention from UFO investigators who noticed recurring descriptions among different cases. People across states and professions described similar encounters. Men dressed in stark black suits, driving featureless cars, behaving with unnatural precision. Witnesses reported hearing identical phrases or cadence patterns from different MIB visitors. Their vocabulary often lacked regional dialects or slang. Their questions came across as memorized scripts. When asked to repeat themselves, they delivered the same wording without variation. It made interrogations feel rehearsed, as if the men were following guidelines rather than speaking naturally. The small behavioral inconsistencies magnified the strangeness. A restaurant owner in the Midwest said 2 men visited him after he reported strange lights over a lake. They ordered food but didn't touch it, instead staring at their plates with a kind of clinical curiosity. When the owner asked whether something was wrong with the meal, one of them replied it was fine, but continued to make no attempt to eat. After a few minutes of awkward silence, the men resumed questioning him about the lights. Once they left, the food untouched remained exactly where it had been placed, undisturbed by utensils or even fingerprints. A gas station attendant in Nevada recalled a similar incident in which a man in a black suit asked detailed questions about a UFO seen by local residents. The man purchased a cup of coffee but held it without drinking. The attendant watched him leave the store and enter a car described as immaculate and oddly silent. The man drove away slowly, maintaining an unwavering posture as if sitting rigidly upright, never adjusting his position or checking his mirrors. These stories created a portrait of individuals who appeared human but didn't behave convincingly. Witnesses felt unsettled not by what the men said, but the feeling that they were performing humanity rather than living it. Researchers in the 1960s, including John Kuehl and Jacques Vallée, documented these nuances exhaustively. They noticed the men often demonstrated limited understanding of common cultural references. Their speech mirrored textbook English rather than colloquial patterns. They gestured less than normal humans, and their faces held expressions that seemed practiced rather than spontaneous. And their eyes, consistently mentioned, appeared too focused, too steady, and too intense. In several reports, witnesses described feeling physically affected by the encounters. Some experienced nausea or dizziness during the visit. Others reported hearing a faint humming or oscillation that accompanied the men's presence. In one case, a witness claimed the men's voices sounded slightly out of sync with their lip movements, a detail that might have been dismissed if not for the number of similar accounts recorded elsewhere. These inconsistencies led to a divided interpretation within the research community. One side believed the men in black were highly specialized government operatives trained to intimidate witnesses or retrieve sensitive material. The other side suspected that the men were something else entirely, entities capable of imitating human appearance well enough to pass at first glance, but incapable of replicating natural human behavior. This era also revealed an increase in vehicle anomalies associated with MIB encounters. Witnesses described cars that appeared brand new, free of scratches or dirt. Some cars emitting no engine noise. Others accelerated unusually smoothly. A few witnesses reported license plates without state markings or combinations of numbers and letters that didn't correspond to existing registration databases. And these vehicles, they quickly vanished, leaving no trace. The uncanny nature of the cars reinforced the idea that the men in black operated outside conventional constraints. Despite the growing database of encounters, official agencies remained silent. When reporters asked the Air Force about MIB reports, a spokesman dismissed them as misinterpretations or hoaxes. Some said the men were likely private investigators or pranksters. Others suggested these encounters were exaggerated. But those statements didn't explain why so many witnesses reported similar details or why the men's behavior felt too peculiar to belong to any known professional group. The tension between the government agencies and unexplained phenomena grew sharper as high-profile sightings continued. Every significant UFO case seemed to generate fresh accounts of intimidation or bizarre visitors. The phenomena fed off itself, creating a feedback loop. Sightings led to investigations. Investigations led to MIB visits. MIB visits generated further fear and speculations, which led to more sightings being reported discreetly rather than publicly. This environment set the stage for events that would unfold in the mid-1960s in a small town in West Virginia, Point Pleasant. Point Pleasant became a crucible where multiple strands of high strangeness converged. The sightings there weren't limited to strange lights or unidentified craft. The town experienced a wave of phenomena, cryptid encounters, psychic disturbances, bizarre phone calls, poltergeist-like events, and the persistence of men dressed in black who asked questions that went far beyond the scope of government interest. The MIB activity surrounding the Mothman encounters didn't resemble ordinary intelligence work. Witnesses described men who seemed startled by basic objects, who didn't understand common social cues, and who delivered questions with stiff, unnatural intensity. Cars appeared and disappeared in improbable ways. Individuals who had never spoken publicly about their experience received visits from men who recited their stories back to them with unsettling precision. John Keel, who investigated the Mothman events in real time, documented multiple instances of strange individuals appearing in Point Pleasant. Some introduced themselves as reporters but displayed no understanding of journalism. Others claimed to be government investigators but carried no credentials. They asked locals about sightings, personal backgrounds, and even their emotional states. The questions focused as much on witness reactions as the phenomena themselves. Keel noted that the men in black in Point Pleasant behaved less like the human species and more like entities attempting to gather information through trial and error. The questions often felt off-target, as if they lacked context for their experiences they were investigating. Witnesses described a sense of being studied, not interrogated. The behavior echoed earlier MIB encounters, but with weighted weirdness. The men's movements seemed robotic at times. Their attempt at small talk failed in uncanny ways. Some displayed physical traits that didn't align with normal human biology. What happened in Point Pleasant pushed the Men in Black mythos into a new era. The phenomena no longer fit comfortably into the framework of government secrecy. The men's behavior lacked the professionalism one would expect from trained intelligence operatives. Their knowledge of personal details suggests surveillance capabilities beyond the reach of 1960s technology. Their presence followed patterns that matched paranormal events rather than strategic defense initiatives. And as the Mothman wave intensified, so did the strangeness of the MIB encounters. People began reporting visits from men whose skin appeared waxy and whose eyes reflected light unnaturally. Some men asked odd questions about witness physiology or emotional response to sightings. Others seemed fascinated by household objects as if encountering them for the first time. These details elevated the Men in Black from mysterious agents to uncanny figures who blurred the line between human impersonators and something altogether different. The build-up toward the Mothman encounters marked a shift in how researchers interpreted MIB activity. The earlier notion of the Men in Black served as secretive government agents started collapsing under the weight of consistent oddities. Something about the pattern didn't add up. These visitors acted like they understood the concept of human behavior without grasping the nuances. Their presence echoed folklore more than espionage. They arrived in moments of high strangeness, conducted themselves in uncanny fashion, and disappeared without leaving any trace. This transitional period marked the beginning of cultural realization. Whatever the Men in Black were, they weren't simple men. And in Act 3, we explore the Mothman events in depth, where these figures stepped out from the shadows and displayed traits that belonged less to intelligent operatives and more to entities with their own inscrutable agenda. Entities that showed up not just to monitor sightings, but to interact with the witnesses in ways that defied logic. A lot of words. I know it is. I know it's a lot of words. But if you listen to what I'm saying here, I hope everybody's getting what I'm picking up what I'm putting down here. Hold on just a second. Somebody messaged. All right, folks. Well, that's the end of Act 2. So we're about to move on to Act 3. But we're going to breeze through a lot of Act 3. It's much shorter than the rest of them. So Act 3 was written in a way to kind of draw a parallel between this week's episode and last week's episode. I think I'm going to start trying to do that to say, hey, well, here we talked about this in Season 1 or Season 2, so we're going to touch back on this to draw a parallel to kind of bring the two together a little bit. MIB really had a big footprint in the Mothman story. And if you were here last week, you remember how much we went into detail about the MIB. I feel like the Mothman story was the first story that really made us go, who are these strange people in black suits showing up to ask people questions? It's a little weird. However, in the Mothman story, we did deal with a lot of, like, weird phone calls, cars just sitting. I want to look ahead just a little bit. So, we do have some pictures tonight. Probably here after we finish Act 3, I want to look at the pictures with everybody. Because there are some we've got some very old pictures. We have the unofficial first photograph of what was being called the MIB. All right. And we're going to look at that. And then we also have some surveillance footage, which is a rare thing because, generally speaking, when it comes to MIB, the reason we don't have photographs is because it seems like when MIB walk in the front of a building, the security cameras just conveniently quit working. And this also kind of lends, some authenticity to what we understand the MIB to be. That is, they're not necessarily human. You know, and this is a lot of the photos that we're going to look at tonight don't necessarily come from old photographs. These are like newer, you know, one of them is a very old photograph and the other one is kind of recent. But when we look at the idea of what we think the MIB really are, there is a general consensus that the MIB are not human. And when we think about, well, if they're not human, then what could they be? All right? And immediately a lot of people go to extraterrestrial. And this is, you know, this kind of lends to the authenticity, the concept that they are extraterrestrial because their mannerisms, the way that they kind of act mechanical, like they don't act like a normal human being, like they know what a human acts like, but they don't do it very well, right? Like, so like if I were to go to, say, Zimbabwe, I could act like me, but everybody in Zimbabwe is going to think that I'm weird. Oh, here we go. Hold on. Wait for it. Are they going to... Oh, awesome. Sweet. Way to go. Way to go, Twitch. Twitch just caught somebody trying to spam the channel. Awesome. Sorry. But yeah, if I go to Zimbabwe, people are going to think that I'm weird because I don't act like I'm from Zimbabwe, right? They're going to say, oh, well, this weird guy came up and he was doing this and this. Like, what I would consider a social norm is not the social norm in Zimbabwe, right? And I think this is where we get in the ideas that maybe the MIB is not human. That I feel like their growing consensus is that they are extraterrestrial, that they are masquerading as human. They understand enough about the human, like, way of speaking and being and interacting with other people enough to fake it from a distance. But when you get up close and you start interacting with them and you really get a good look at who you're talking to, that's when the cracks start to show. And I think that's why these MIB were being picked out so hard. Like, the ones that you see from a distance, you don't think too much about because they look human from a distance. Get one up close. And then we start noticing things like no eyebrows and eyes spaced funny and a smile that doesn't seem right and mannerisms, figures of speech don't quite make sense. All right? Hello, YouTube. I see you over there. Thank you for joining tonight. If you want to get in with the chat, you're more than welcome to dive off in here. You're welcome to comment in the live stream. Speech chat is active, so I will hear whatever you got to say. You're welcome to chat. You don't have to, but I'm just letting you know you're welcome to. We're about halfway through now. Things are looking good. We're about to dive off in Act 3, where we're going to draw the parallel between last week's episode and this week's episode. Last week we talked about the Mothman, and this week we are talking about MIB, so we're going to draw this parallel right quick. Let's move on to Act 3. Y'all ready? Let's go. So Point Pleasant was already unsettled before the sightings began. The Ohio River Valley carried an atmosphere of isolation and near permanent twilight during the winter months. Oh, hold on. Oh, geez, sneezing again. The TNT area, the abandoned World War II munitions site, sat like a forgotten industrial graveyard on the edge of town. When the first sightings of the Mothman occurred, the town's nerves frayed quickly, but by the time the newspapers ran their stories, the region became a magnet for fear and curiosity. But something else arrived alongside the sightings, something quieter, stranger, and more persistent than the winged figure people saw near the old power plant. People began noticing visitors. We covered these in last week's episode. The men who knocked on doors at dusk, who claimed to be reporters, yet didn't understand basic journalism, wandered through the town asking about the sightings in ways that felt disconnected from the creature itself. These weren't locals. They weren't investigators from Charleston or Huntington. They were men dressed in dark suits driving unfamiliar cars, displaying an eerie awareness of who had seen what and when a witness hadn't spoke publicly. Point Pleasant marked the moment where the MIB stopped being associated solely with UFOs and stepped into a broader paranormal territory. The Mothman wave created a tapestry of phenomena: strange lights in the sky, prophetic dreams, disembodied voices over telephone lines, unsettling poltergeist outbreaks, and even a series of encounters with men who behaved as if learning how to be human by watching from a distance. One of the earliest MIB-related incidents during the Mothman flap involved Merle Partridge, the man who reported his television malfunctioning before witnessing glowing red lights outside his home. Shortly after his story circulated, two men visited him unexpectedly. They arrived in an old black car with spotless chrome and asked detailed questions about his experience. Partridge later noted that their clothing looked slightly outdated, as if they stepped out of a decade-old photograph. Their speech pattern felt clipped and oddly formal. They seemed particularly interested in the behavior of Partridge's dog, which ran into the woods the night of the sighting and never returned. Partridge later described feeling uneasy not because of the questions, but because of the way the men watched him. Their eyes didn't track his movements naturally, and they didn't blink. Their reactions lagged behind the conversation by fractions of a second, small but noticeable. When they finished their questioning, they stepped back from their car, or back toward their car with synchronized precision. The encounter left Partridge wondering whether he had interacted with government operatives or something else entirely. Another key event came from the experiences of witnesses near the TNT domes, the exact area that I walked you guys through last week. Several teenagers who saw the creature near the abandoned buildings received visits from odd men who claimed to be conducting interviews for various government agencies. The teenagers described the men as calm but unnervingly detached, asking questions that didn't make sense and ignoring answers that should have mattered. With one teenager mentioning feeling terrified during the sighting, the man responded by asking, quote, "Why would fear be necessary?" End quote. The question struck the witness as bizarre, as if the man didn't understand the emotional dimension of the experience. The more encounters followed. Connie Carpenter, who reported seeing a gray figure with enormous wings near the Mason County Country Club, received her own visit. A man with an unnatural pallor knocked on her door and introduced himself as Jack Brown. He asked about the creature, her exact location during the sighting, and her emotional response to the event. Carpenter described the man's behavior as stiff and unsettling. His suit didn't fit correctly. His voice sounded rehearsed. He showed an interest in personal details unrelated to the sighting, such as her school schedule and her relationship with family members. When Carpenter's fiancée arrived unexpectedly, the visitor left abruptly, walking toward an older model car, and didn't appear to match any vehicle registered locally. People in town reported similar incidences. Men appeared at gas stations asking about UFO sightings, even when the conversations revolved around the Mothman. They visited local businesses posing as reporters, but failed to produce press credentials. Some introduced themselves as a representative from agencies that didn't exist. Their mannerisms were too formal, their conversations too controlled, and their behavior too odd to be dismissed as curious outsiders. John Keel encountered these figures firsthand during his investigation. While conducting interviews with witnesses, he received a stream of bizarre phone calls from individuals claiming to possess information about the phenomena. Some identified themselves as government officials, while others offered cryptic warnings. Keel later suspected that at least some of his callers weren't human. They demonstrated knowledge of events that hadn't happened yet or discussed details not shared publicly. Their voices occasionally sounded distorted, as if filtered through an artificial medium. When Keel attempted to trace the calls, he found no records. The lines always appeared inactive or disconnected. During this time, the Men in Black didn't limit themselves to physical visits. They expanded their presence through telephone calls, letters, anonymous tips. Witnesses received instructions not to speak about the encounters they hadn't disclosed. Families received warnings about dangerous roads or unexpected accidents that never came to pass. People felt watched even when alone. presence of the men in black became inseparable from the Mothman itself, as if the two phenomena were connected by an underlying intelligence of shared origin. One woman reported that two men knocked on her door shortly after she told her sister about a sighting near the TNT area. She hadn't contacted authorities or journalists, only her sister knew. Yet the men arrived within hours. They asked her to recount the event in exact detail. When she mentioned her fear, one of the men responded by tilting his head in a manner she described as mechanical, as if analyzing her reaction rather than empathizing with it. After the questioning, the men stepped into a black sedan, drove away without headlights on, disappearing into the night as though swallowed by the fog. Very interesting. I've got an idea. I'm forming an idea of what I think is really going on here. The most chilling accounts came from those who described the men displaying inhuman traits. A woman who worked at a downtown store reported a man in a dark suit asking about John Keel. She said his eyes were extremely large and deep-set, casting an unnatural reflection under the store lights. His movements felt jerky, like someone adjusting their limbs without full familiarity. When she asked whether he was unwell, the man simply smiled and walked away. His lips moved, but his teeth didn't look quite right. Too uniform, too smooth, too even in color and spacing. Another merchant described a different visitor whose skin appeared almost synthetic. He asked unusual questions about local traffic patterns and weather conditions. When the merchant offered him a glass of water, the man held the glass without taking a sip. He examined it with an expression of fascination until placing it back on the counter untouched. The man left after a brief series of questions, stepping into a car that looked new despite being a decade old. And Keel's own experiences added weight to the growing belief that the men in black simply were not government operatives. He documented occasions where individuals he'd never spoken to seemed to possess detailed knowledge of his movements, his interviews, and his research notes. Some callers predicted his events that later occurred. Hold on. Sorry. The inconsistency suggested manipulation or interference from an intelligence operating outside normal human boundaries. The phenomenon's intensity increased as December 1967 approached, the month the Silver Bridge collapsed. The bridge disaster marked the emotional climax of the Mothman wave, sealing the events into paranormal history. But before that tragedy, the Men in Black activity surged in ways that defied explanation. Witnesses began receiving warnings that accidents or death would occur if they continued speaking publicly. Some received calls predicting the collapse itself, though the details varied. Keel himself believed he was misled intentionally. He felt caught in a web of half-truths and misdirection created by an intelligence interested more in confusion than clarity. Point Pleasant became a laboratory of high strangeness. The men in black within the town behaved more erratically than in earlier cases. They exhibited traits that aligned with the creature's sightings. The strange phone calls, the psychic disturbances. Witnesses began to speculate that the MIB were not external actors responding to the phenomena, but integral components of it. They didn't chase the Mothman, they appeared because the Mothman appeared. Their behavior seemed tied to whatever intelligence orchestrated the wave of events. And during our discussion last week, I emphasized the chaotic, layered nature of the Point Pleasant encounters, the way multiple phenomena overlapped, interconnected, and bled into each other. The Men in Black played a significant role in that mosaic. They hovered at the edges of the story like observers attempting to gather data on the human response to extraordinary stimuli. Their questions rarely focused on factual elements of sightings. Instead, they centered on emotions, thoughts, dreams, and anxieties. It was as if they were studying the human psyche as much as the creature itself. The eerie quality of these interactions deepened with when witnesses reported physical effects after encounters. People felt drained, dizzy, disoriented. One witness described feeling as though energy had been pulled from her during a visit. Another reported hearing a faint buzzing sound that seemed to emanate from the man's body rather than the environment. A mechanic who encountered a visitor near his garage said the man's presence caused a nearby fluorescent light to start flickering. These details made the phenomena feel less like government and more like an intrusion from something that operated outside conventional biology or technology. One of the most chilling incidents involved a young couple who saw a winged figure while driving near the river. They didn't report the sighting publicly. They only discussed it between themselves. 2 nights later, a man knocked on their door near midnight. He wore a black suit and a hat, his face partially obscured. He asked whether they had seen anything unusual on the road that week, and the couple denied it. But the man repeated the details of the sighting with precise accuracy. He then asked how the encounter made them feel. The husband described a sensation of raw fear. The man nodded, then thanked them, and walked away. The couple watched him get into a car without headlights on and disappear. The frequency of these visits convinced many locals that the men in black were somehow connected to the larger phenomena gripping the town. The behaviors didn't match espionage or military oversight. They fit a different pattern, one that aligned with mimicry, observation, and psychological experimentation. Point Pleasant became a crucible that reshaped the Men in Black mythology permanently. What had once been dismissed as intelligence officers evolved into something else entirely. Something that mirrored human form while failing to grasp humanity's subtleties. The Mothman case proved that the Men in Black were not guarding secrets, they were part of the secret. And their behavior during that chaotic year exposed the cracks in whatever mask they wore to navigate human society. So there it is, we've hit the end of Act 3. Okay, we're coming down to the last little bitty of it. I got 6 pages of script left. So we officially drew the parallel between Mothman and MIB from last week to this week. So this next one, we're going to start talking about non-human imposters, okay? The idea of what they could be if they're not government agents, right? So, here we go. Act 4, the non-human imposters. So by the time the Mothman wave faded from Point Pleasant, the Men in Black had already stepped out of the shadows and into a new identity. No longer mysterious agents of a clandestine bureau, but participants in a broader phenomena. Their behavior no longer resembled oversight or suppression. It mirrored intrusion, mimicry, and experimentation. After the Silver Bridge collapse, witnesses hoped the strange visitors would disappear along with the creature sightings. Instead, encounters continued across the country, now infused with an unmistakable otherworldly quality. The men's methods evolved just enough to mimic official channels, yet their attempts to imitate human life grew stranger and more unsettling. The shift became clear in cases recorded during the early 1970s, starting with one of the most disturbing incidents on record, the Herbert Hopkins encounter. Hopkins was a respected physician and hypnotist living in Maine. His involvement with a UFO abduction case attracted limited attention until the night he received a phone call from a man claiming to represent New Jersey Research Organization. The man asked to speak with Hopkins about his work with the case and requested immediate permission to visit. Hopkins agreed, expecting the meeting the following day. Within minutes of hanging up the phone, someone knocked on his door. Hopkins opened it to find a pale, hairless man dressed in a perfectly pressed black suit. His face appeared smooth, almost rubbery, with lips that looked drawn onto his skin rather than naturally formed. The man's movements felt deliberate, lacking spontaneity. He walked into the living room with slow, measured steps and sat down rigidly, watching Hopkins with a fixed expression. The visitor asked detailed questions about the abduction case and displayed knowledge no one outside Hopkins' circle possessed. The encounter grew stranger when the man asked Hopkins to place a coin in his hand. Hopkins complied, laying a small piece of copper on his palm. The man instructed him to watch closely. Slowly, the coin began to fade. Its metallic shine dulled, its edges blurred, and within seconds it dissolved into nothing. Hopkins described this disturbance as silent and absolute, leaving no residue or trace. The man had explained the coin no longer existed, that it was nowhere on this plane of reality. A phrase delivered with an eerie calmness that suggested he believed the statement literally. Moments later, the man's speech began to falter. He informed Hopkins that his energy was running low and that he must leave. He stood abruptly, walking toward the door with mechanical stiffness. Hopkins watched him exit and was alarmed to see the visitor descend to the porch steps, unsteadily, almost collapsing before regaining balance. He walked toward a bright light at the end of the driveway, and Hopkins realized the visitor wasn't entering a car. The man walked directly toward the glow and seemed to merge with it. Then the light vanished, leaving the driveway empty. Hopkins' encounter epitomized the shift from human mimicry to non-human demonstration. The men no longer pretended to be part of any government agency. They revealed abilities and limitations that set them apart from normal biological forms. The visitor, drained of energy, behaved like a machine losing power rather than a man experiencing fatigue. Witnesses in following decades reported similar details: mechanical movements, monotone voices, and glitches in behavior that felt more akin to malfunctioning systems than nervous humans. Cases from the 1970s and early 1980s highlighted another shift, one in which the men in black displayed interest in technology they should not have been able to manipulate. In one instance, a UFO researcher in California described two men arriving at his home shortly after he photographed unusual lights in the hot Mojave Desert. The men asked to see his camera. When he handed it to them, one of the men held it awkwardly, turning over as if unfamiliar with common devices. He pressed the shutter repeatedly without advancing the film, yet the mechanism did not jam. Instead, the entire roll of film inside the camera became exposed and ruined without the back being opened. The man handed the camera back and instructed the researcher to, quote, avoid photographing things not meant for you, end quote. The men left without further explanation. The ruined film baffled photograph experts, who confirmed that the back had never been opened and the exposure mechanism had not been used incorrectly. Another incident involved a family in Washington state who reported repeated UFO sightings near their property. Shortly after calling their local sheriff to report the lights, two men arrived claiming to be investigators. They carried briefcases and wore matching suits. The family invited them inside, but quickly found their behavior unnerving. The men sat too close together on the couch, mirroring each other's movements. When offered food, they declined it, but stared intently at a bowl of fruit on the table as if fascinated by the colors. One of the men asked the homeowner to identify each piece of fruit, repeating the names in a flat, emotionless tone. The visit ended abruptly when the men stood simultaneously and announced that they had all the information they needed. They left without acknowledging the stunned family, walking to a car described as perfectly clean, like a rental that never touched the road. Reports like these multiplied through the 80s and 90s. Witnesses across North America described visitors whose attempts at blending into human society felt increasingly clumsy. The men's questions often diverged from topics of UFOs and instead focused on human emotions, dreams, and thoughts. Some asked questions like, quote, "Why do you fear what you do not understand?" End quote. Others inquired about the nature of human love, grief, and belief. When witnesses asked why such questions mattered, the men responded with cryptic statements. They seemed less interested in the event itself and more interested in how humans process the phenomena. This shift dovetailed into technological anomalies that accompanied MIB encounters. Mechanical or electronic devices malfunctioned during visits. Televisions displayed static even when turned off. Telephones rang with no one on the line. Lights flickered, dimmed, and grew brighter when the men walked into a room. In one case, a woman reported her home radio turning on by itself as the two men approached her porch. The radio emitted a high-pitched tone rather than music or speech. When the men left, the radio returned to normal operation. The technological disturbances mirrored the reports that surfaced in poltergeist investigations, raising the questions of the nature of the men in black. Were they physical beings, energy forms, projections, or something caught in between dimensions? Researchers debated theories that range from extraterrestrial agents to interdimensional entities and ultra-terrestrials, a term coined to describe beings that coexisted with humans but operate outside physical constraints. During this period, a piece of surveillance footage from Guelph, Ontario, became one of the most cited examples of MIB presence in modern era. The security camera of a hotel captured two men entering in the lobby. Both wear black suits, white shirts, and black ties. Both were bald, pale, and expressionless. They moved with unnatural synchronization, turning their heads and bodies in unison. The hotel staff who spoke with investigators afterward described feeling unsettled by the presence. The men who asked about the UFO witness who had checked in the night before, demonstrating knowledge of the witness's arrival without requesting information from the front desk. Witness accounts emphasized the proximity of their faces. The men stood too close, leaning forward in a way that felt invasive. Their eyes were described as large, dark, and reflective. Both men seemed fascinated by mundane objects, pens, brochures, room keys. After speaking briefly with the staff, they left without checking in or asking to see the witness directly. The surveillance footage circulated within the UFO community, becoming one of the few visual records supporting the existence of MIB-like figures. Analysis noted that the men's synchronized movements and rigid posture as key indicators of non-human behavior. All right, folks. We have screenshots from this hotel lobby. Y'all want to see this? Check this out. So this is the lobby of that hotel. This is the 1990s. Kind of what you expect. There is another image that kind of correlates to this one. But it, oops. It's the same two guys, just a little further into the lobby. This one was, I felt, the most clear. So I'm going to say, for the 1990s, this type of clothing was a little weird, right? People in the 90s weren't dressing like this unless they were going to a funeral, okay? The hats especially. And I will say, if you look at the gate, like, let's look at the way that they're... See if I can zoom in a little more here. They are in step. They're synced in step here. Their left foot, both left foot is forward, both right foot is in back. Not perfectly in step. It seems like the guy in front, his arms are straight down. The guy in back, maybe his right hand is swinging forward a little more. And I'm not gonna lie, the dude in front, he's got a little swagger going on to his hat. But still, like, people really didn't wear fedoras in the 90s. And I don't know why these hats are so tightly associated with the MIB. It's just a little strange. Not the best photo, but this was security cameras from the 1990s. Let's look at, like, I have seen this footage, or not this footage, but these stills a bunch of times. I don't see anything that tells me that this information being superimposed is artificial. You know, the distortion from the pixelation seems normal. When it comes to, like, normal screenshots from videos with cameras, multiplexers will automatically superimpose a lot of this information. And back then, before the invention of smartphones, everybody kind of pulled their stills from whatever the multiplexer was doing. But supposedly these are the two gentlemen that walked into the front lobby of this hotel. But while we're talking about it, I do have one more photo I want to share with you. Just as soon as I grab one more of these frosty beverages. Okay, so this other photo is supposedly, you know what, let me see if I can find the backstory of this photo. Hold on. I'm not getting a clear breakdown here. All right, well, let me pull this photo over. We're going to zoom out here so y'all can see the whole frame. We have a little bit of information on this. Okay, so hold on. This information I pulled is for the other photo. Here we go. There's no confirmed original negative, no confirmed hotel record, no public documentation of the camera system used. Everything comes through Timothy Beckley himself. Where he captured two bald men in black suits moving in synchronization, mechanical fashion through the lobby. The visual similarity between men. Skeptics reply that similar imagery can spread through folklore and influence later hoaxes, making visual matches unreliable. Yeah, it's hard to give me some solid info on this. So, a little background on this one. This was the official, unofficial first photo of wow, is YouTube that far behind me? The official, unofficial first photo of the first Men in Black. So the story goes that this gentleman was being followed. He didn't know by who. So this was during the Russian communist scare. He was being followed by a man who kept asking bizarre questions. And he snuck out a side entrance of his building, snapped this photograph of this man. And to this day, nobody knows who the man is. And people believe that this is the first photo of an MIB. Official, unofficial photo of the MIB. Okay? Geez, YouTube is super lagging behind me. I don't know why it's so far behind. It somehow dropped 3.5 minutes behind this stream. That's fine. It's okay. I say again, if you're watching on YouTube and you feel like interacting in chat, you're more than welcome to. I am a normal person and I will talk back. All right, well, let's dive back into it. Enough dilly-dally. Oh, you're ready to get into Act 5 so we can wrap this thing up? I know I am. Kind of a quiet night, not a lot of people coming in. If you're watching, this is a Saturday night stream. I'm kind of playing back and forth to see if Saturday or Sunday night is better. If you think Saturday is better, let me know. If you think Sunday is better, let me know. Either way, let me know something. Let me know if we're doing something good here. Let's dive off into Act 5. Before we do, I'm going to go and use the restroom right quick. And I will be right back, folks. Don't go anywhere. If you spend enough time talking to people who live around the edges of the Hockomock Swamp, a pattern starts to form. The stories change in detail. Some say it was massive. Others say it ran on 2 legs. But they all agree on one thing. Those freaking gingers, jeez. Aliens. Wait, we got something good? I guess the best thing I got for a ginger is this.
Who are you calling a cootie queen, you lit liquor?
A 1999 Taunton Daily Gazette article titled "The Man Who Isn't There" compiled police logs over 20 similar calls dating back to the 1960s. While not a cryptid in a biological sense, the Phantom Hitchhiker fits the triangle's pattern of overlapping folklore. Half ghost story, half modern myth tied to the same stretch of road that borders the swamp. I love this camera so much. Yeah, I've in another life I was a photographer, and I have a massive collection of cameras. The last count was like 230 cameras. The oldest one is from 1918, and the newest one is from 2026. Very old cameras, very new cameras. I love cameras. I collect them, all ages, all sizes, all styles. When it comes to cameras, it's like booty. I don't discriminate. They're all great. But anywho, it's, yeah, I'm in the middle of a project. So since you like photography, I will tell you, I'm in the middle of a project that I have a bunch of old cameras from like the 60s and 70s that I really like the way the image comes across through those cameras. I have a couple old digital cameras. I'm going to tear them down and see if I can't find a way to put like a digitizer from a digital camera in one of my older cameras, so I can use them like a digital camera, but it's through the old camera. You see what I'm saying? It will probably take me a year or two to figure it out, but I'll get it.
I get it.
since we're talking about it, I'm going to show you what my favorite camera is. I love this camera so much. So this is the Argus Super 75. I love this camera. This camera was issued to standard infantry during World War II, and when I found my Super 75, it was rusted shut. And when I finally got it open, it had an original roll of film in it from the 1940s. So I sealed it, sent it off to a company, and they developed the images. And they said, well, there was only 2 or 3 on there, but they were from World War II. It was from somebody that was active military, and they took some battlefield shots. They just sent me the email. I looked at them. I was like, hey, that's really cool. And that was about it. They sent me a free roll of film for it. But no, it's a really great camera. When I use the bathroom, I'll grab it. I would love to show it off. I love showing off this camera. It is one of my favorites. It is my favorite. But I'm glad somebody around here appreciates photography like I do. So I've got a book of like paranormal caught on film. Back in the day when reading books was fun, right? Oh, I'm back. I'm back, people. Hello. I've returned. Just in time for Act 5. Are y'all ready? Are y'all freaking ready? Because I'm ready. I know you're ready because I'm ready. Jesus, YouTube still hasn't caught up. What is going on with YouTube? Oh, the stream is just lagging behind. Let's catch it up. There we go. Okay, cool. So, you ready to get into Act 5, jerks? All 0 people watching. Let's go, Act 5. The modern era changed the nature of the Men in Black, but it didn't diminish them. Their image remained the same: black suits, emotionless faces, odd speech patterns, but the behavior drifted closer to the edges of reality itself, as technology advanced, so did the phenomena. Digital life created new avenues for interference. Smartphones, security cameras, and social networks should have made the Men in Black easier to document, yet they remain as elusive as ever, appearing briefly, vanishing instantly, and leaving behind disruptions that defied conventional explanation. Witnesses in the 2010s described figures who arrived without making a sound. One woman in Illinois reported seeing a man in a black suit standing under a streetlight across from her apartment after she filmed strange lights in the sky. She watched him for several minutes. He never moved, and when she blinked, he was suddenly closer. Even though she hadn't looked away long enough for anyone to cross any type of distance. She tried to record him with her phone, but the screen froze as soon as she tapped the camera icon. When she lowered the device, the man was gone. Moments later, the phone rebooted on its own. When she checked her clock, 23 minutes had passed. These lapses in time become increasingly common. People reported losing track of minutes or hours after seeing an MIB. Some describe feeling as though their thoughts were no longer entirely their own. Others experienced vivid dreams following encounters. Dreams involving dark rooms, humming sounds, and disembodied voices asking questions about fear, memory, and belief. Dream imagery resembled accounts from abduction cases, drawing a strong connection between the MIB and the broader phenomena. Theories about the MIB evolved as well. Government explanations grew less persuasive as witnesses described behaviors that no intelligence agency could replicate. Ufologists began proposing new frameworks, extra-dimensional visitors, psychic constructs, or even manifestations of the human mind responding to contact with non-human intelligence. The idea that the MIB were agents from another planet became less popular than the notion that they were something far stranger. entities that interacted with humanity through borrowed forms. One theory suggests that the MIB function as a kind of interface between humans and the paranormal. Not individuals, not projections, but bodies, representations. They appear when the phenomenon needs a voice or a presence capable of interacting with the physical world. This theory gained traction after multiple witnesses described MIB encounters that felt more like hallucinations than physical experiences, yet left behind tangible effects, malfunctioning electronics, missing items, or altered memory. Psychologists offered their own interpretations, claiming that the MIB were products of mass suggestion of cultural conditioning. The argument centered on the idea that UFO witnesses, primed by decades of movies, folklore, and generated the image of MIB subconsciously. But this explanation failed to account for hundreds of reports that predated Hollywood's influence, and the constant traits described by witnesses who had never heard of the MIB. The psychological theory also didn't explain the physical evidence left behind in some encounters, such as damaged electronics, missing photographs. Others speculated that the MIB were extraterrestrial entities using human-like forms to interact with species whose biology they didn't fully understand. This idea grew from the way the men struggled with simple social cues, misunderstood common objects, and mimicked human behavior poorly. Yet, even this theory fell short of capturing the full strangeness of the encounters. The MIB appeared to manipulate physical reality in ways no biological being should be able to. They dissolved objects, disrupted technology, and moved in ways that defied physics. Another theory, one that gained significant traction in recent years, suggests that the MIB are not extraterrestrial but ultra-terrestrial. These entities would not be visitors from another planet, but inhabitants of a reality adjacent to ours. They might shift between dimensions or vibrational slates, appearing briefly in human form before returning to their native environment. This theory neatly explained the way the men behaved like imitations rather than originals, as well as their ability to appear and disappear with no regard for doors, windows, or distance. The ultra-terrestrial model also resonated with the Point Pleasant events, where multiple phenomena overlapped in ways that suggest a single intelligence orchestrating the wave. The Mothman, the strange phone calls, the prophetic dreams, the men in black appeared as different expressions of the same underlying force. The ultra-terrestrial idea proposed that these were not separate incidents, but facets of a larger phenomena interacting with humanity in ways that defied linear reasoning. In the digital age, the MIB became even harder to categorize. People reported receiving messages from anonymous accounts moments after posting UFO footage. Some messages containing warnings, others contained distorted images of corrupted text. A few included coordinates that led nowhere or timestamps that didn't correspond to any known time zone. These interactions blurred the line between physical and the digital presence. The men didn't need to knock on doors anymore. They could appear in inboxes, notifications, and glitches in software. One researcher described an incident where footage of a strange craft disappeared from his hard drive moments after being saved. The folder containing the file remained intact, but the video itself had been overwritten with random data, as if the zeros and ones had been scrambled deliberately. Minutes later, he received an email from an address with no domain name containing a single message: "Stop." The email vanished after he read it. His computer crashed and rebooted without warning. The corrupted file could never be recovered. Encounters like these pushed the phenomena further into the realm of non-physical interference. It became clear that whatever intelligence operated the Men in Black could manipulate digital information as easily as it manipulated human perception. The men's appearance and physical form grew less frequent, but their influence expanded into a new channel. They became something more diffuse, less bound by location or form, and in some cases, the MIB still appeared physically. Witnesses described figures who stood motionless in the distance, watching without approaching. Others saw men walking through crowds in perfect synchronization, never interacting with anyone. Some describe seeing them on trains or in airports, sitting stiffly without luggage, speaking to no one, and disappearing between security checkpoints. The behavior resembled a glitch in reality, a presence that seemed out of place even when surrounded by hundreds of people. A man in Colorado claimed he followed one such figure through a crowd terminal, only to watch it vanish behind a column. The man ran to the other side expecting to catch a glimpse of him, but the figure was gone. Witnesses nearby claimed they never saw anyone matching his description. Security footage later reviewed by airport staff showed no sign of the figure, despite multiple witnesses insisting they saw him clearly. These incidents suggest an intelligence that operated at the fringes of perception. The men in black seemed able to enter and exit reality at will, appearing only long enough to deliver messages or observe witnesses before dissolving back into whatever dimension they originated from. Excuse me, I'm a little phlegmy. Jeez, it always happens right at the end. The question of motive remains the most difficult aspect of phenomena. Unlike government agencies, the men in black offer no clear rationale for their actions. They don't gather physical evidence. They don't arrest witnesses. They don't suppress information in any consistent manner. Their warnings tend to be vague, often delivered with an eerie calmness that feels more observational than threatening. Some theorists argue that the men in black act as a regulatory force, ensuring human encounters with the unknown don't escalate beyond certain thresholds. They intervene when people get too close to understanding the phenomena. They observe when human behavior shifts in response to sightings. Their role might be to maintain balance, not through control, but through subtle influence. Others believe the MIB are not protectors, but parasites, entities drawn to the emotional intensity and fear, feeding on the physiological energy generated by contact with the unknown. This theory stems from the consistent emotional drain reported by witnesses after encounters. If fear is a resource, then the men in black could be harvesting it. A more esoteric theory posits that the MIB are an emergent property of the human consciousness. When people encounter something that shatters their understanding of reality, the mind generates a symbolic guardian or enforcer figure to contain the physiological or the psychological rupture. In this model, the men in black are not entities but manifestation, archetypes created by the collective human psyche. Yet this idea falters under scrutiny, failing to explain the physical evidence left behind or the consistent presence of the men in cases where multiple witnesses observed them simultaneously. The final theory ties back to Point Pleasant. This was last episode, and the events that we covered last week. It suggests that the men in black and phenomena like the Mothman came from the same source, not extraterrestrial or psychological, but interdimensional. These entities may share the same origin, the same intelligence, or the same purpose. They appear during moments of transition, upheaval, or heightened energy. They deliver messages, warnings, or observations. They recede when the phenomenon concludes. And if this theory holds true, then the men in black are not guardians or threats. They are components of something larger, an intelligence that manifests in different forms depending on the context. Sometimes it appears as a creature with glowing red eyes. Sometimes it appears as a man in a black suit asking questions that feel rehearsed. Sometimes it appears as a glitch in a digital file or a voice at the other end of a telephone. Whatever they are, they exist in the space where reality frays, where the boundary between the known and the unknown thins. They stand as a reminder that the world is stranger than it appears and that humanity is not the only intelligence observing it. The men in black remain one of the most persistent mysteries in paranormal history. Their presence spans decades, cultures, and continents. Their behavior defies classification, and their motives resist explanation. They represent a phenomena that sits at the crossroads of conspiracy and the supernatural, a bridge between human perception and forces that operate beyond it. So, we've come to the end of Act 5. I see you guys, people on YouTube. If you want to drop some comments down below, I will react. We can talk about it. Let me know what you think about the MIBs. What do you think they really are? Are they human, non-human, interdimensional, extraterrestrial, ultra-terrestrial? I want to know your ideas. I want to know what you're thinking about, because we're about to get into it. We're about to break it down and fully, we've heard the full investigation here. We've come to the end, and now we're going to discuss what we think the MIB really are. So, first and foremost, I'm going to say I don't think that the MIB are human. They're definitely not a government agency. Take the ideas of what you think you know about the MIB and throw it out the window, because it's not like the Hollywood idea. It's not what you think it is. We're not dealing with humans working for a human agency. I can say that with almost 100% certainty. It just feels that. That's how I feel about it. That's how I feel. So, if they're not human, what are they? Ultra-terrestrial feels a little far-fetched for me. I do like the idea from last week's episode that we are dealing with something ultra-terrestrial for Mothman. Mothman feels more ultra-terrestrial than anything. And in case you don't know, ultra-terrestrial, it means something that's living on the same plane of existence, just in a parallel universe, for the lack of a better word. I'm not certain that we're dealing with something ultra-terrestrial. Simply because when we look at the case of MIBs, something just straight up fell off the fucking wall behind me. This happens every time I'm talking about something spooky. Jesus Christ. Fucking goosebumps. Fuck. They're here. They're watching. I can feel it. Oh, Jesus. I wish my camera was panned over and caught that. What was it even hanging on? Oof. Fucking chills, bro. Fucking chills. God damn. I don't even fucking know. That was weird. Anyway. Ultra-terrestrial. I don't think we're dealing with anything ultra-terrestrial. Simply because their mannerisms don't necessarily feel human, right? So if we're dealing with something that's on a parallel reality with ours, does kind of imply that we're dealing with something human, right? However, I don't think that we are explicitly dealing with something human. I think we're dealing with something that's doing its best to masquerade as a human, all right? Extraterrestrial kind of makes the most sense. However, let me move this mic over here. However, I feel like we are not explicitly looking at extraterrestrials like we think. That we're not seeing MIBs aren't necessarily alien greys, reptilians, whatever you think of when you think about extraterrestrial. I don't think we're explicitly dealing with that. I think the MIBs are something like a drone. Okay? We have reported experiences with people that come face to face with the MIB, and the consensus is facial expressions are wrong. basic human interactions and mannerisms are wrong. Mouths look like they're painted on rather than actually having lips. Facial expressions and reactions to normal conversation are delayed. And you know what that sounds like to me? It sounds like a form of AI or robotics. And this is why I think extraterrestrial, but not the physical entity of an extraterrestrial. I think the MIB, this is just my thought, and you can sound off in chat, tell me what you think about it. I think the MIB are technically extraterrestrial. However, they are not biological, but they are some type of robotic sent down, like sent down to collect data, right? But they don't quite know how to act human. Like, maybe, so we're dealing with, you know, this stuff goes all the way back to the 1960s, sometimes earlier. What year was the Roswell crash? Like 61? 60? Wait, it was earlier than that. Let me look it up right quick. Shame on me, I should know this. (1947). Yeah, that sounds about right. So let's say the Roswell crash was the beginning. Because up until that point, we didn't really have UFOs. We didn't have people claiming extraterrestrials, UFOs, anything from another planet. So let's say that the Roswell incident was the original incident. They sent something down to collect data on human intelligence. They brought that information back. They built some type of artificial intelligence robot, whatever it is, you know, insert your adjective here. And they programmed it with the data from that time. The 40s, the mid-40s. All right? Now, say it took them 10, 15 years to produce that hardware and to program it. So they're like, well, we need to go down and collect data on the humans. How are we going to do it? All right? Well, we can send this robot down that looks like a human. Pretty much like a human. Sure, it's good enough. Send it down there. But it only understands the mannerisms and things that people from 1947 understand. This would explain, I think this would explain why the MIBs were so interested in the ballpoint pen. Let's see when the ballpoint pen was invented. 1818. Holy shit. Oh, so the first commercially available ballpoint pen came out in 1954. So if they were running off of data collected in 1947, they would absolutely not know what the ballpoint pen was until 1954. You see what I'm getting at here? So if they were dealing with a limited data from the 1940s, you know, they dropped in the middle of the desert, right? This would explain why the MIB were confused by bowls of fruit. Right? You see what I'm getting at? Is this so far-fetched? Is this so far-fetched? It's not so crazy, right? So I believe that the MIB are explicitly non-human. But I think, judging from the information pulled from tonight's episode, from the research, that we are dealing with the MIB are actually like a drone sent down from extraterrestrials to collect the data. on how to be more human. Because when we look at the MIB and we look at how they interact with people, they seem more interested in the emotional response than the event that they're responding to, right? So it begs the question, why are they collecting data about emotional responses over data about the event itself? If not to perfect a human-like entity. It feels like the MIB from the 60s and 70s were like beta testing. Yeah, send it in down there. They're worried about the Russians, and they're worried about being blacklisted, and they're worried about communists, and they're worried about spies. All we got to do is say that we're part of a government agency, and they're not going to ask questions. Boom. You know, a little bit of sense goes into the background of it, right? Right? I mean, anybody today would understand the mentality of the way things were back in the 60s. It makes sense. Oh, geez, we're dropping frames. Oh, geez. Hold on, folks. All right, well, seems like we're dealing with a little bit of a connection error. We're going to go ahead and wrap things up tonight before, it seems like before my internet goes out. Well, we get in and out of here, folks. We're not sure what we're going to talk about next week, but I'm definitely going to say that the MIB are paranormal. We're dealing with something strange. Oh, there we go. We're back to full strength. All right. So while we got good stream quality, we're gonna wrap this thing up. I'm definitely gonna say the MIB is non-human. I don't know if that makes that paranormal, but I definitely know that we're dealing with something we don't fully understand. Right? So that being said, we're going to move on. And we're going to close the case on the Men in Black. The Men in Black are not human. Hands down. This is what we're dealing with. All right. So thanks everybody for being here tonight. Very interesting case. Very nice little deep dive into the Men in Black. If send me an email if you feel like streaming on Saturday was a good idea. Let me know. If you feel like streaming on a Sunday was a good idea, let me know. I'm playing around with days. I'm trying to get more people used to seeing me consistently on a certain day. If you think Saturdays are good, let me know. If you think Sundays are better, let me know. Either way, shoot me an email, beyondshadowspodcast@gmail.com. You can find it by clicking this QR code up here. Or clicking on it, scanning this QR code. You can scan this QR code. It'll take you to all the links. It'll even give you a link to the emails. All the socials are there. Expect a bunch of videos on YouTube, Instagram, Facebook the next few days. Got a bunch of videos getting ready to get made. Oh, geez, it appears we lost a follower on Twitch. That sucks. Oh, well. Hey, can't win all the time. And also, if you've got your own paranormal tale, your own story, something crazy that's happened to you, feel free to reach out to me at beyondshadowspodcast@gmail.com. The information is in the stream description. Also, if you're watching on YouTube, go to the channel. My contact information is there. If you're watching on Twitch, My contact information is there. You can scan the QR code up here. It will send you to all the information. Also, the email is down below, right here, underneath the mic. That's the email down there if you're watching. If you're listening on Spotify, YouTube, Apple Podcasts, I'm sure everybody hears this all the time, but we're trying to grow. The point of this podcast is my ability to go out and talk about things that I enjoy. The paranormal is one of them. And, the dream is to make this a full-time gig, right? And I cannot grow unless you, the listener, gives me likes, gives me follows, does reviews. To this day, we don't have a single rate or review. We've been podcasting for almost 2 years now. If you could take some time out of your day to jump on whatever platform that you're listening to and rate and review, it would be very greatly appreciated. I'm doing my best here, doing what I can within my reach. But thanks again for everybody that's here tonight. I know it was kind of a slow night. I will say again, if you think Saturday nights were good to stream live, let me know. If Sunday nights were better or easier for you, let me know. I will do whatever it takes to get more people in here live so we can interact with each other and we can talk to each other and have conversations and stimulate conversation, because that's why I stream live, because I want to stimulate conversation and have full conversations with people while we're doing the investigation. I'm not just reading a script. I want to interact with people. I am not that podcaster or that streamer that will sit here and not react to people talking in chat. If you want to say something in chat, say something in chat. We will talk about it. If I'm getting ready to close the podcast and you want to say hello or you want to talk about something, I will stop shutting down the podcast and we will sit here and talk about it. I'm a human. I will talk back. I love this shit. I live for it. I made a podcast out of nothing just to talk about it. So if you want to talk about it, I will talk about it. Again, the email is beyondshadowspodcast@gmail.com. You can find it down below, just underneath me on the screen here. Feel free to email me if you get an idea for an episode, if you've got your own paranormal tale, case, or claim, or if you've got any comments or suggestions about the show. Feel free to email me anytime you want. And again, keep your eyes peeled on the socials this week. We're going to drop a whole bunch of videos probably this weekend. Try to get things jumping, getting people interested again. Thank you to everybody on YouTube that's popped in here. I see one person has been watching for like the last 30 minutes, and thank you. Bless your soul. Thank you for watching so much. I really appreciate it. I see you there, but I don't know who you are, and I'm glad you're here. Thank you for being here. The analytics information just shows me that somebody's watching, and it shows me what time you popped in. So I'm glad you're here. Thank you so much. I'm really grateful that somebody watched tonight. It seems like my Twitch family kind of dropped off the map tonight, so usually somebody pops in and says something. But I'm glad you're here. Thank you, friend. Thanks for being here. You know what? What did we do? We did Mothman last week. We did MIB this week, so I think we're due for a good ghost story. So what do you say we do something ghosts or poltergeist related next week? That sounds about right. Geez, whoa, did I close that? Gross. So we'll do something ghost or poltergeist related next week, unless somebody emails in with a suggestion. Let me get another quick shout out to our new follower on YouTube. Let me get the name again. Hold on. Thank you again to Lucy Hernandez for your subscription on YouTube. Thank you so much, Lucy. You're the best. You're amazing. that being said, I think we're done. We're going to wrap this thing up and put a pretty little bow on top. Thank you, everybody, for being here tonight. I know this subject was kind of beat to death, but, you know, we do what we can. So next week, we're going to do something ghost and poltergeist related. I hope everybody has a good night. We're going to read this last little bit, and we're going to wrap this thing up. The Men in Black remain one of the most persistent mysteries in paranormal history. Their presence spans decades, cultures, and continents. Their behavior defies classification, and their motives resist explanation. They represent a phenomena that sits at the crossroads of conspiracy and the supernatural, a bridge between human perception and the forces that operate beyond it. To understand them fully, we must accept that the world is not limited to what we can measure or explain. The Men in Black remind us that some truths hide behind the veil, watching, waiting, and occasionally stepping forward to remind us that we are not alone. And with that, we close this week's journey into the Men in Black. So if you find yourself alone at home after making a report or taking a photo or a video, something strange you saw, the phone rings. Don't answer the phone. There's a knock at the door. Don't answer the door. And you look out your window and you see a man standing in the shadows across the street. Don't talk to him. Don't answer that door. Don't answer the phone. But whatever you do, make sure you follow us. Beyond the shadows. Good night, everybody.
A creature like that. How would it ever die?
And this monster's just running right at me.
Annihilated by nuclear bombs.
Beast is not dead. I put 4 bullets into him.
Why, you're crazy.
But I saw that monster too. All I want is for someone to believe me.
Contaminated.
Face. It's horrible. Look like it would scare you to death.
All right, let's get to work.